Okay, so as I mentioned, we are at the final day for the LSTA Grant training, and our focus today will be implementation and budget and a few wrap-up components. As before, this is Diane Baker. I'm the LSTA coordinator here at the State Library and Archives. So today's agenda, very short review. The focus for today are the next couple of items, the implementation section and the budget sections of the grant application. We'll do just a general application review also after that, talk some about submitting the application. I'm going to throw in a quickie about the CIPA in there just because it is an important component. Those of you that were in the introductory section or session that we had during the proposal phase, it's very similar, so you can probably just take it in all as a refresher. So let's get started. The LSTA review, it's a federal program, state-based, so each state has their own version of this program. We operate off of the 5-year plan. We call it the Nevada LSTA plan. Annually funded by Congress, so we are waiting for Congress to get a budget. Currently, even though the October 1 has come and gone and federal government is rolling along, they're operating on a continuing resolution, which means everything runs, but nothing is specifically funded, especially in the case of these types of granting programs, since this is not forward funded. We're in the midst of the annual grant cycle. We've all completed the proposals, smack in the middle of the application phase, and the grant review at the final of when all the applications are in and finalized. The grant review is done by our State Council on Libraries and Literacy. Their meeting is in January, and that's pretty much every year. I think on a rare occasion we may have had fallen into the first part of February, but almost always January for that review. So where we've been, we did go over the need, target audiences and plans in the first webinar. Last week went over evaluation and outcomes. And today we are going to be doing the budget and implementation. The webinars up to, the first 2 webinars have already been archived and are on the NSLA YouTube channel. This one will be archived and converted and uploaded by tomorrow for your listening pleasure. And the timeline hasn't changed. We are looking at wrapping up the webinars with this one here. November 12th is when the applications are due to NSLA. This is a Wednesday. And just a little over a month, a little under a month away. And the meeting specifically is January 14th through 15th, 2015. That's when the council meeting will be. I do have more information sent out about this meeting at the beginning of December. March 2015, again, these are just general estimates of when usually we hear about the federal budget. It can be a little sooner. Last year was a little bit sooner than the year before. The year before was way late April, early May is when after they got over their budget battles, and that was the year of sequestration, if you recall that. April, hoping by April we'll be able to get award notifications out to the successful applicants and have you be able to get underway anywhere between April or by July 1st of next year, 2015. As I mentioned before, we have a questions landing page. Same one, you'll see it several times throughout today. You can ask questions as we're going along, or wait until we have the questions here, or a Q&A period at the end. Okay, well, let's get underway with implementation, and this is how you're going to roll out everything that you've proposed thus far. Implementation is your plan of action. It is the details of the activities that will lead you to your final accomplishment, to reaching your goal. So it's task-oriented, does need to be specific, not only for the reviewers to catch what you are planning to do and really feel confident that you have it laid out and not going to have any surprises, at least not the kind that would come from not having enough detail in your project plan. And there we go. It needs to include enough steps, as I mentioned, for the reviewers to really grasp that you have a complete understanding, that you have allotted enough time and energy in order to accomplish what you, excuse me, what you set out. And it identifies personnel. Excuse me, I'm going to have to take a break just a moment. Okay, I'm back. So the last item on this slide is publicity, an important aspect. Not only it's just to reach your target population, but then you also have the aspect of letting your community know the great program or programs that you're doing, and chance to promote the library through this project. Now, specifically, when you're getting into doing your implementation section, you do want to identify who's involved. If you have a smaller project, you're a smaller library, this might be you, the one individual, or maybe you have some additional help. But be sure to identify if there's other project staff, if you have involvement from other sections within your library, other branches, be sure to identify that as well, or project partners. You want to identify what activities will take place. Connect to the need and opportunity. That helps the reviewer see why all these things are happening. Some things may not be immediately obvious how they connect, and some things may be, but it's always best not to leave any questions for the reviewers. And again, provide sufficient detail so that, again, confirms your handle on the project. When will these take place? I'll have some examples coming up here soon, so you can see the best way to identify that in your project. And why is the approach being used? Some of our council members, reviewers, they represent different constituencies. And that's because this is a NRS formed board, does cover libraries, does cover literacy. And some of our individuals are very well plugged into certain areas and are familiar with different projects that may be related, may have a little bit information about the type of program that you're looking at, and you may end up with some questions as to why a certain approach or a certain partner was not contacted or included. So that might only take a sentence or two in order to confirm that what you've decided on will be the most effective approach to solving the need or problem that you've identified. As promised, this is an example of one application that I think it's a couple years ago, how they proposed the information. Now, this one does go through and identifies specific months. I usually don't recommend that because there is the chance that we may not get the funding in the time frame that fits what's been proposed. Usually we do, and it's not that hard to adjust it. I usually recommend, and you'll see it in the next example, using month 1, month 2, or if you need to break it down, you can break it down into weeks depending on what works for your project. But in this case, you can see March to May, they identified a youth services coordinator and their team. And so you have the who, you have the time frame, and you have a good idea of what they're going to be doing on this particular project. With this one assembling 200 kits that include books. Some of that might include some collection development plan as part of the full application. Then you can just see how they went through and included the different information that was required, and also as to when they were planning. Can't see a little further down, but they did program in when the evaluation times were going to be in the project. This is an example from a mini grant, and here you see what usually works best with the time frames, where you have month 1 and 2, and you can see the specifics that have been listed out here. Now remember, with the mini grants, those of you that are writing, it's not as intense for the application, but you do still need sufficient information in here to clearly identify what's going to be done by whom and when. And I do, and the reviewers do understand that the mini grants are often one person operation or a very small group because they're a smaller dollar project. Okay. Now, one of the things that was on the website, I sent out a follow-up email that indicated a number of things were uploaded to the LSTA website. You don't have to have them for today, but they do flesh out some of the information that you'll need in preparing the application, and some of it has information also that will help you as you're rolling out a project. So you need to plan for project publicity, not only to tell your community and your target population, but include in your publicity how you're going to let your other stakeholders know, whether it's your library board or if there are other governmental agencies or even some partners that may or may not have been participating in the program but might want to know. And what's the best way to contact your group? Different groups might be a little different. In the case of stakeholders like a library board, you could be part of one of the meeting agendas. But if you're reaching out to the community, what's the best way to get a hold of your community or get a hold of your target population? Could it be newspaper, radio, website, webcast, social media? That probably should now include text if you do text outreach. A lot of our, in the youth category, text is how they live, so you may want to consider that one as well. The handout that is up on the website goes over some of the specifics that are required by the Institute of Museums and Library Services. There are examples of text that you can include in public service announcements, or if you're doing brochures or any other report handout. There's information, there's a website for you to go and grab the logo for the Institute of Museums and Library Services. If you are running out of space or you have something that is very limited on space, such as you're going to do bookmarks, you can just leave enough room to have the IMLS logo, and that would be sufficient. You don't have to worry about having all the text on all those things. If you are putting up a website or any other web presence information on that, be sure and include IMLS in the attributions when you have that information up and out for your user population. And if you have any questions as you're going along, of course, we do include the Nevada State Library and Archives as part of the attribution in the text. Again, if you are limited on space, the preference is to utilize the IMLS information, and then the NSLA would be secondary. And that last one there, that's where we're going. IMLS is the one that does insist on having credit in this program. Now, the one thing mentioned with the timeline, or excuse me, with implementation is the timeline. This is listed, usually it's your last page or next to last page. The table gives you the ability to put in several amounts of information. The implementation you can add to this table. This can go on to another page if you needed to go that way at that level. The dates, again, I still recommend that you identify the month of the project as opposed to a fixed date. Now that could be different if you are working around a fixed date type of event, such as if you're doing a program around a specific holiday or some other event that has an established day. As you roll down the timeline in your own application, there are some hard and fast dates put in there, such as when the 6-month evaluation is due and when the final evaluation, both narrative and fiscal evaluation, will be required at the end of the program. And I did have one question regarding the timeline. If there's a different type of project plan that the agency uses, is it allowable to use that instead of the timeline? It is fine to use the project plan that is internal and have that as an attachment. There should be still some references in the timeline itself, and the detail you can refer out to the specific attachment for more information. Okay, another question slide, but I don't see any questions at this point. Okay. Budget. This is some of the fun part. Now, when you were at the proposal phase, we were just asking for a round number that you were looking for in the federal funds. Now you're at the point of getting more specific. Often we have a question at this point that says, well, I put this certain number in my proposal, and now that I am digging into this and getting more specific numbers, looking around, I found that I really underestimated the dollar amount. Can I put the application in for a larger amount than the proposal? The answer to that is yes, you can. What we're looking for in the application is for you to have realistic numbers that match up with your project. So you still need to get that project accomplished. We want you to have those numbers in, but you do need to have some reasonable backup as to how you came to those numbers. A general number, I think we've had it sometimes where they wanted to bring in a consultant and they pretty much picked a number out of the air where they hadn't really contracted to get a consultant in the past. It would be better to just make a few phone calls, even without going through any process, if your agency allows you to do that, just so you can get into a pretty good number on that part. And our reviewers are pretty savvy with that kind of thing as far as being able to judge if the costs that are being proposed are reasonable. Most of our individuals have gone through the reviewing process at least several times. So let's get into some specifics here. In the application, we are looking for whole dollars only. Sometimes you might really know how that certain things come down to dollars and cents, but with the federal program and with how we are will actually grant money, it will be in whole dollars. The costs do need to represent what the expenditures will be to run the program within the grant time frame. Sometimes with subscriptions and if you have a contract of some sort, it might go a little past the time frame. That is potentially allowable. However, the program does not allow for, if you purchase equipment, to also buy a 5-year service contract. You can buy a reasonable service contract and keep that in the grant program for a year, or potentially some service contracts, the smallest contract they'll allow you to get is a 2 years, so you will go past. However, the focus of your budget needs to be for the costs for whatever the program is within the grant time frame. 10% match is required. It can be in kind. It can be actual cash, whether it comes from your jurisdiction's budget, if you have donations that come in or you raise for this purpose, it can be that kind of cash as well. Could also be a mix of both in kind and cash. One of the things that's not allowable is lost revenue. With this program, LSTA, we don't have an indirect cost allowance in this. So there are some agencies that see this as lost revenue, not being able to write that in, but that does not count as match for the program. The in-kind question for some agencies that might require the certification that indirect costs are not allowable within the program, I will be glad to send a letter to whatever fiscal or department might require it to have that information so they can see that it's an official aspect. And this applies from the top down. The state of Nevada does not take an indirect cost off of the LSTA program. So that keeps more money available to roll out to our library projects across the state. Now, allowable costs. This is the subject of two of the handouts that were posted. There's allowable cost tips 1 and 2. And as I mentioned, no indirect costs. There are a number of things that do come up under the federal program that are not allowable, and these are federal rules coming through. It used to be the OMB, Office of Management and Budget. Now everything is codified in the Code of Federal Regulations. Most everything we need is in 2 CFR 225, but for those of you that like to look those things up, if you do have any questions on if something's allowable, please be sure to ask me. There are some things that are absolutely not allowable. You cannot buy food like if you had an open house to bring in a particular population into the library to introduce them, to have programs. You're not allowed to do lobbying with the funds. That you kind of wonder, well, how in the world would you do that? On occasion, we've seen applications where they are looking to run a program, and part of that is supporting their trying to reach out to the community because they want to increase the tax allotment to the library. So federal funds can't be used to help you try and get, lobby your local community for more funds. That's one of those areas that every now and then comes up. A few things, such as giveaways, that you think, well, it doesn't seem too crazy, but it does hit us in the library land a little harder in some ways, such as summer reading. Something that we often do in the public library. Summer reading has incentives and giveaways. However, the federal funds cannot be used for things that are strictly giveaways. This is also true with programs that do one books, because trying to get a whole community reading, lots of times you like to have paperbacks or versions of the book available for people just to come in, pick up so they can join in the community and you can help promote that program throughout. Again, unfortunately, LSTA funds may not be used for that purpose. A few things, it depends on how it is utilized within the program, wherein if it's set up one way, it's not allowable, and another way it is. Sounds a little crazy, but that's the federal government. One case that we had several years ago was regarding the literacy program, and they were going to be bringing in individuals. It was going to be a weekly, several-week in-sequence training that was going to help with several aspects of literacy, and they wanted to set up to have a graduation, a recognition, and in recognition they wanted to give away or give them all a dictionary. Well, that's a giveaway, and we wouldn't be able to make that costs come out of LSTA funds. If you looked at that same program a little differently, dictionaries might be allowable. As part of the training from week to week, if they had exercises that were required using a dictionary, where it would be an educational or textbook type item, students in the program could receive a dictionary to use as part of their lesson materials. So in that case, it becomes allowable because it's utilized as part of the program and it's not a giveaway. I know, sounds a little like splitting hairs, but it's one of the ways that there are occasions where sometimes things can be allowable depending on how they're used. Okay, and going on beyond that, two parts of on your pages in the application, there are two segments. There is the budget grid form, and there is the budget narrative that lays out specifics about the numbers in the grid. So the budget categories that you see on the grid, this is what you've got here. Start at the top with salaries. These are true salaries, meaning that they will be receiving a salary that goes through your regular salary line in your budget, whether it's a category or a line. So you are, in this case, looking to put money into the jurisdiction's budget for salary. That can work for some projects, but again, it's short term. And to add a position in salary, sometimes it's an awful lot of work. Usually we see that kind of cost come up in contractual because it's often a temporary position that's being established. So if you're working through a manpower type agency, temporary agency where you can recruit an individual, those costs do go under contractual. Travel is one of the categories. Equipment, you see two equipment categories. The $5,000 plus and the equipment property general, where the unit cost is under $5,000. We have two categories because it reflects a requirement of the federal government again, that if you have an item, and it's one single item, not a group, but one single item that is $5,000 or more, it can definitely be an LSTA cost, but it requires an additional authorization on the federal government before you can make that purchase. That's even after your grant has been accepted and been funded. Even at that point, we still have to go to the federal level to get that authorization. It doesn't take very long. Usually you can do it in a day or two completely by email, but it is an additional step. So this identifies some funds that have to add that additional step. And then on the back end, those particular items of equipment do require follow-up for inventory. And then we also have another category. The current configuration of the budget categories, a number of things actually do end up down in other. And library materials, I'll bounce back up to that one. That is anything that would be in what we would call a materials budget. And it can be print, it can be electronic subscriptions, things of that sort. Okay. Now the budget narrative. The grid is very important, but the budget narrative tells the story. And I can tell you our reviewers really do focus on the budget narrative. So you're explaining specifically how the money will be spent in each category. So think for a moment, they have looked through the application up to this point, seeing the need, seeing the benefit, taking a look at how you're going to make this happen with your implementation section and evaluation. So now they're looking at the numbers. So they have this in mind, and they're looking not only what numbers are in the grid, but they do reflect back on the previous information to make sure everything ties in. So you're looking to identify the LSTA grant funds, the local in-kind and or donated funds. So any money, any and all monies that are going to be used for the project need to be discussed here. And in your matching funds, you do want to identify it's not only the dollar amount that you have to meet, which ultimately you certify that amount at the end of the project, but this shows where your matching funds are going to come from, and it does identify to the reviewers how that requirement is going to be met. Now, for personnel, for in-kind, if you are using this for match or usually for match, you will want to identify the position. You don't need to identify the person's name. We're just looking for the position, so it could be, librarian 1, and the percentage of time. They're going to use 10% of their time during the grant period, which that might be reasonable, that might be high. It all depends. And then you're going to give what that comes out to if you do 10% of the individual, whether they're salaried or by the hour. All depends on how your jurisdiction keeps that information. This refers again to the information and allowable costs, re-referencing the information that you have there. So the 10% match, as I mentioned, can be cash, in-kind, or a mix. We're looking to make it as easy as possible for the project manager to be able to identify and meet that 10% match requirement. And that is something that at the back end we do, as I mentioned, we do need to certify that. So at the final reporting, you will have to identify that 10% match and certify it. All costs should be detailed. This is an area that the reviewers do take a pretty good look at. And they want to make sure that the money is being, the limited resources of money that we have is being well used, and everything can be accounted for. Let's see, equipment, talked about that. Grid and narrative match. This is an area that has been a little bit tricky in the past. Things can change in the last minute when you're waiting or getting final costs, and you make adjustments as you get information either from vendors or from your fiscal people, whether it's in the library or maybe in your budget or town manager's office, and things can change. But when you change something on the grid page, you need to make sure it changes on the narrative page, and also if any of those numbers change and affect what is on page 1. Part of the grant application juggling. So what would that look like? This is one version where the applicant took all the LSTA funds, did the categories, and identified the specifics for how the funding was going to be utilized. So first, LSTA funds, they were going to buy an item that was over $5,000. So I have that information there, have some very specific information listed out, and can see exactly where the federal funds will be going and how I got to that total. The same with in-kind. Repeated the process and went through all the categories that are going to be needed for the in-kind costs, whether they are using it for matching or not. What is required for the project is a 10% match. You can overmatch, but again, it would be what you could certify. Now, we should have another one here. There we go. Let me go back. There we go. I thought popped over one there for the mini grant. This is how it could look for you in the mini grant. We do have the categories already listed out in the budget narrative section. We do have a grid before this, but then we have this for the quick review in the small program for you to identify in each category what you would have in costs, whether it's in kind or whether it's the federal funds you are requesting. Okay, so I have a question on clarifying whether benefits information on staff salaries can be included in the in-kind cost. Benefits can be a little tricky to do that, but if your fiscal folks have a formula, some of them have a percentage, they use a percentage formula, or if they have actual numbers, it is fine to use the cost of the individual. Benefits are a cost of personnel, so those can be included. It can be a little trickier depending. Some will just use the hourly, especially in the mini grant category that you're seeing here. But definitely you can use that. And Hope Williams, here at the State Library and Archives, requiring or certifying the 10% match. And actually here within the State Library, especially with the statewide and some of the other programs that we operate, the State Library has to participate, has to be involved in the match and maintenance of effort. So with the internal grants, that is part of our whole reporting at the end of the fiscal year. So thank you, Hope, for that question, but that's one item that doesn't have to be broken out for an internal project. Okay, let's see. As I gave it away, there's another question landing page before I went back. It doesn't look like we have any other questions. Some of these things, as you're digging into getting your specifics for your program, might bring questions up as to if a cost is allowable or how much information you should include. So it gives the reviewers enough information to feel confident about the numbers, but you don't want to overwhelm them either on that side. So if you have anything along those lines or other things relating to budget numbers, no problem. Just send me a question as you're going along. And I'd be glad to try to make sure that we get enough information to you so you can fill out the budget grid and also the budget narrative with sufficient information to impress the reviewers. Okay. So I promised a quick discussion of CIPA, which is the Children's Internet Protection Act. And I mentioned that because the Children's Internet Protection Act specifically mentioned the Library Services and Technology Act, LSTA, as being required to comply. And this happened, I would say, gosh, almost 15 years ago now, over a dozen years ago. So it is actually written, the LSTA program shows up in this particular legislation, the Children's Internet Protection Act. So for LSTA, and specifically for public libraries or public K-12 libraries, these are the two categories for which it applies. Other libraries that are eligible for LSTA, such as academic or special libraries, are not bound by this. Is it fair? Not exactly, but that's what we're doing. The other area, if you have an official consortium that includes a public library or public K-12 school library, CIPA could apply to that kind of project as well. Now, if you're in a school library, for the most part, just about every public school complies with the Children's Internet Protection Act, just by virtue of what they have to conform to be local parental, so to act as parents. So they usually do comply. I had that again. And if you're requesting LSTA funds, CIPA comes into play if you're requesting monies for internet service or for new computers to access the internet, and actually components that sit on the network that is connected to the internet. Those are the types of costs that would come into question with CIPA if you're one of the affected libraries. So a strategy is, if you are a public library and your library chooses not to filter or have the technology protection measures, TPMs, what they call it, in E-rate land, you might want to consider a different funding source. Maybe see if there's gift money or matching funds. Computers often are kind of a focus, or some technology, not all, but some can be something that local businesses or other local organizations might be willing to go with, especially if you have funds from another source to do up your whole program. And if by chance you're receiving, as a public library, receiving E-rate discounts for internet and internal wiring, you are complying with FIPA. Any questions about FIPA, if it applies to what you want to buy, if your library falls into whatever category for the FIPA requirements, just give me a call. I'd be glad to make sure that that is not going to be an issue for you. So we have kind of wrapped up with the discussion of the application components, how to fill out and prepare the different segments of the application. Just going to do a quick review of the application again. DUNS number started off with our first webinar and indicated that this is now a required item to include on your application information. Email address, be sure I know who the primary person is. Don't mind if there's multiples, but just want to make sure I know who the first person to contact. And on that first page, you are going to be putting down the amount of federal funds, LSTA monies that you want, and the total cost of the project. And that's where I mentioned earlier, to make sure your costs come across not only on the grid, match up in the narrative, and match up here on your first page. Person served, your best estimate. One thing we didn't talk about, and there's actually two, is the title. But this is how it will be known in all the reporting. And the reporting architecture is getting more and more open. The push is for, including IMLS, is to have all of the information open and transparent. And we're getting pretty close to that. There's going to be a brand new reporting database for IMLS in the next couple of years, and the purpose is not only to have, complete information available on the projects for the granting agency, but also for it to be open and available to the public. So it is something that should be easy. As far as the title, it's usually fairly well defined as how much space we have to include in that, and that's at the moment, and there's multiple places where it could be reported. One at the front end, depending on your dollar threshold, and then definitely at the back end when it is being reported as a completed project. Now, reviewers actually do latch on to titles. You don't want it too cutesy, but something that's memorable, or at least tells, gives them a reminder of just looking at the title, going, "Yep, that's what that project is. I remember now that I've read it." This is a few examples. The first one is the longest of the examples, and it does give you an idea. No problem with using two-part titles with the colon in it. Having that first part giving the heart of the matter, giving you something that is easy to remember. Let's see, a couple of others, one more that we had down here. Again, don't have the title way too long, and you don't have to tell the complete story of your project in the title. Enough so it's a good identifier of it, but it doesn't have to tell the whole story of the project necessarily. And if we get into a reporting structure, and I've received a very long title, we do end up having to truncate it, and if it's in some of the reporting project information that's being used, especially by IMLS, hopefully I'll get to you and ask you to, so we can work on a title, so we won't have to have a title that's cut off, and maybe some important information left off of the database for your project. So there you go on that. The other category that we didn't talk about was an abstract, and that's again on purpose, that it should stand alone. It is the focus when it's on that front page. Reviewers, again, they look at the title and abstract after they're getting into the final reviewing part. And if you have good information in the title and the abstract, it does refresh them and keep them on top of the program and helps them remember the important aspects that you are proposing in the program. And publishable, as I mentioned, SPR, that we just love. I can't say I love them, but they do have lots of initialisms and acronyms in the federal government. These are two of them. The first one refers to the reporting program that is used by IMLF. The second one, FADA, finding a way to pronounce some of these too. The Federal Fiscal Accounting and Transparency Act. This is one of the ones where we report on the front end right after you have been granted funds. If you have a project that is $25,000 or more, we pre-report your information to the federal level. And that particular database, FADA, does include granting projects, contracts, vendors, the whole 9 yards of federal government spending. So we're a little blip on that comparatively. In the abstract, you want it clear and concise. Do not exceed the limit. If by chance you roll past, we do try to lock them, but sometimes they just, when you download them, put them in different operating systems or whatever, the locks don't follow through. If your abstract puts you, and you rolled into a second page, you've gone too long. Then it's gotten to be more than what will likely be used by the reviewers or by the reporting of what I can use for some of our reporting purposes. Cover your key elements in order. That kind of helps keep that logic, not only when they're first reading the grant project, but when they're coming back and reviewing over, not only before the review meeting, but as part of the review meeting. This helps keep it very logical, straightforward for them to remember the cool thing about the program. And the tip, and that's why I put it here, is try to write this after you have at least a draft in place. And that way, then you can mine important things that you have developed in the other sections. You really don't want your abstract to be a cut and paste where you just have taken sentences from the other parts of the application. Or the reviewers, the readers, they do see what's happened there, but you can use that information and craft an abstract that will give you a good view of the project without being caught in strictly cut and paste. Okay. No other questions at this point, so let's do a quick recap on all the good things that we have discussed to this point. The need, target population and the benefits to that population, the connection to the LSTA and local plans, your implementation, which is your how-to, evaluation, it shows what you were able to accomplish and the impact, the change that you've made to your users and your community. The budget, there was one more thing, sorry about that, and I do want to emphasize that if you have identified something in the budget, be sure it shows up in the evaluation. Another cough there, sorry. Okay, something else that comes up is attachments, letters for your project. So we see these letters in two categories, and the reviewers pretty much see them that way as well. They will either be letters of support or letters of commitment. And let's take a look at what the difference is there. So letters of support are from the advocates for your project. We want to know who they are, and but they will be telling you in the letter. They will say why it's a great idea. They will, in some respects, be kind of the cheerleaders on your program. They could be coming from within your government. It may be something that your board of supervisors think this is way cool, that they want to send in a support to show how that there's a broader support, not within the library, but in the community. That is definitely useful. On this level, don't want to have too many of these letters, probably just a few. You might solicit and get more than, you might get 5, 6, 7, who knows, number of letters of support. I would recommend to identify the key ones, the ones that state the support of the program the best, and just use 2 or 3 for the support category. Now, letters of commitment. These are from individuals that are going to be participating in a real way with your project. So these will be from your actual partners. If you are partnering with an organization or with another agency that will be actually do something for the program. They might be donating. They might be actually participating. You may have something on site with that partner. So that letter from that partner is very important. Target audience. Sometimes there's groups that are just looking for an important connection with the library, and there's an organization, sometimes an association that has a strong connection or represents the target audience that you are looking to connect with. That would be a great letter of commitment that how they are going to be supporting. Also, in those letters, whether it's from the partners or the target audience, someone representing that group, be sure to identify what they will contribute or how they are going to participate, so it shows the commitment that they have to your project. Okay, I've got another questions landing page. We are getting close to the end of today's program. So I want to make sure that you've had a chance to ask anything. I'm not seeing anything come up. So that's good. Let's take a look at the last few. I have one more section before I wrap up, which is on reviewer-friendly grants and how to make sure that the grant that before the reviewers doesn't annoy them, is usually what I say. So readability. You want to make sure that the information that you have available there is easily scanned, easily captured. They are going to be reading quite a few applications. So you want to make sure that when they're looking at yours, they can definitely see the information, that you can draw their eye to the important things. You can use bulleted points. You want to avoid having a full page of solid text. Sometimes we have so much great information about any aspect of this, especially when you get into the need category, talking about your target population. There's so much great information that we want to put it all in there. But it's usually more than what is needed for the reviewers. So if you have solid text, just all the way across, all the way through the segment that they are looking at, it does become tough to read. White space, if you can break up and have little breaks in the segment and the sections, it is what I call a visual breather. It makes it easier for them to see the information and not necessarily get overwhelmed. Options of helping to highlight things or make it easier to read. Sometimes you can use headings or subheadings, kind of outlining looking things. That can help. Maybe bolding or underlining occasionally. If you bold or underline a lot, then that effect is lost. And from other information, I've noticed that a lot of places do not recommend italics. They can be a little harder to read. Generally, it's just you go from one font, and you don't want to change fonts. You want to stay in the same font going through the whole application. Okay, so basic clear writing things, concise sentences. The longer a sentence goes, it just, again, if you're reading a lot, it's easy for someone to drop off if you have a sentence that goes on for a couple of lines. So try to make your statements concise, not looking for choppy, but careful on sentences that do go on and have a lot of conditional phrases in them. Definitely use the paragraph concept. Keep those things together in one thing. If you have terms, take a look in the guidance that we have, but there are some terms that we recommend to use and what the definitions are that they're used to. That is in the instruction section. But to also avoid jargon, acronyms, initialisms, if they are not explained. We do have a diverse group of reviewers, so even if something is like the greatest, coolest thing in library land, because it is the State Council on Libraries and Literacy, not everyone is going to be universally aware of what the coolest, most wonderful thing is that you saw at the last ALA conference. So if you're referencing something on that, be sure to explain things if they have acronyms, or even if it is a latest piece of equipment that has become the thing for libraries to get. A few other things. As I mentioned, don't assume they know products or subscriptions or software on that part. Be sure, sometimes it just takes an extra sentence, but that way then you get to a point where they don't have any questions. You want to make sure that your ideas flow from one to another. Their proofreader, highly recommended. Sometimes that's a tough one to get, but if you can, and someone who may not be in the thick of the type of program that you're working with, that might have a little different view. The bottom line is to make sure reviewers don't have any questions, that you have told them the complete story, you've given them all the facts, all the support material, and they have, at the end of taking a look at your grant, they have a complete idea of what you want to do and confidence that you can do it. So, a well-rounded project will have your clearly defined need and talk of your target population. In the evaluation of the whole project, you will have one, and I really only need one, but you overchoose can maybe go for 2 outcomes. You want clear, well-developed action plan where the actions relate back to the outcomes or benefits. Not every single one necessarily, but where they can see it as a whole, where they relate back to what you're trying to accomplish. And the last is a means to determine your success. That does relate back to your outcomes. But again, the evaluation does look at the project as a whole. Handout. I think there's one more handout I'll be posting later, but playing by the rules, you want to make sure that you have your instructions, and that is on the website for the LSTA. Whether you have your competitive or mini grant application, instructions are listed there, as well as a glossary of terms. LSTA plan, be sure you have that reference. Guidelines, if you have any questions or need clarifications on guidelines, that's what I'm here for. And the other 2 things that the handout refers to is the rating sheet. For the mini grants and for the competitive grants, I have posted the rating sheets that the reviewers use, and these are the official rating sheets that will be used for the grant applications you are going to submit. The application or the review sheets do become part of our official record with your grant and follow your grant through the whole process. And just a recap of some of the same things we've mentioned. You want this definitely to be user-oriented, easily to identify who's going to benefit and how they will benefit. Your goal is to persuade the reviewers that you're the ones that should get the dollars. And I just, on the submitting of your grant then, oh yeah, my crazy little guy here, let's just pop by. Important on this one, on who can sign, now has become an important aspect. Who can sign the proposal, since it was non-binding, it wasn't as critical who was required to sign from the state library point of view, but now we're at a point where you are going to be setting up not only yourself but your organization to be responsible for the project that is being proposed if it is funded. Can you sign? It maybe yes, maybe no. This is your responsibility to find out who can sign. Sometimes within your organization it has to go up to the board. Sometimes the director or CEO can sign it, and that's sufficient. They have the authority to do that. On that aspect, just be sure by the time you get to November 12th that you've identified who has to sign and they're available. Sometimes that's one of the tricky things. If your jurisdiction requires a board chair signature, you have to make sure they're available, or a representative from the board is available to do that in time for you to submit the grant. Okay, getting it to NSLA, pretty straightforward. So we only need one hard copy application with original signatures for the submission. Needs to be postmarked by our magic date of Wednesday, November 12th. The electronic, I do need that sent in as a Word document. It can also be sent, you can send me a PDF as well, but I do need both if you want to submit a PDF. Certain of your organizations see the PDF as the official submission, and that's fine. We can keep that as the grant copy. We do need the electronic version because we use the information in multiple levels of reporting. So you will email that to me. My email address there, dbaker@admin.nv.gov, by 5 o'clock on Wednesday, November 12th. And of course, it can be before that. And both definitely required. So new this year, mentioned in our first webinar, is that there's an internal review. So the staff review of the application will be for completeness, budget information, compliance. It won't necessarily be for if you have discussed something well enough, unless it's to identify that you have acronyms listed in there, initialisms, or something that's not well described. We'll ask you to provide description on that thing, but not for, it won't be identifying that you have not identified enough things for to back up your need, or to back up that kind of information that you put out in the need or description of your target population. If there's information missing, that's the type of thing we'll be looking for, or if there's mismatched information. The review will be complete no later than Friday, November 21st. Everyone will get a response from me for an application that's been submitted, meaning you will either get an email requesting some additional information or for an edit or update of the application, or you will get an email that said that certifies your application is complete, completed the review, and it will be used as is. So if there's an update or revision that's due, it will be due no later than December 4th. And in that time, it kind of looks like a long time, but the Thanksgiving holiday is in the mix, in play in there. So that should still give you sufficient time to be able to address any additional information or changes that might be needed. Okay, we are wrapped up. We went just a little over an hour this time. The usual contact information here. And my own little publicity, given credit that you've seen in our previous, using some of the IMLS information and logo. So I have come to the end of the third and last of our webinars. So I want to invite you to contact me during the writing phase where you're trying to wrap up. I would be glad to provide any information that you might need, or review some information that if you're trying to work through, I don't mind taking a look at applications prior to the submission date. As we get to like November, well, I think, yeah, as we get real close there, I think November 11th actually is a holiday for some, Veterans Day, but as we're getting real close to that time frame, I can give it less and less time, but I would be glad to provide any input that I can. And my goal in all of this, in these webinars, in the instructions, handouts, the time available, is to make sure you all have a great chance at